Let me tell you something nobody says out loud. The moment you start chasing someone who barely notices you, you quietly give away your power. You text first, you wait, you overthink, and deep down it hurts because you know you deserve better. Being ignored doesn't just sting, it slowly eats your confidence. You start shrinking just to fit into someone else's attention span. And the worst part, they can feel it. When you tolerate crumbs, you teach people you're not hungry for respect. You're desperate for validation. And that changes everything about how they treat you from now on. Now where people get it wrong. They think love is about giving more, trying harder, being nicer. No, real respect doesn't come from overextending yourself. It comes from how you carry yourself when things aren't going your way. Your value is not built on how much you tolerate. It's built on what you refuse to accept. Emotional control is power. Standards are protection. When you understand that, you stop reacting to every change in behavior and you start observing. You move differently. You speak differently. And suddenly people rise to meet you or they reveal they were worth your time. When you start doing all the chasing, you don't realize you're quietly shifting the entire dynamic. In the beginning, attention flows both ways. There's curiosity, there's effort, there's a natural rhythm. But the moment you begin over-investing, double texting, always initiating, always making yourself available, you remove the space that allows attraction to grow. Attraction isn't built in constant presence. It's built in anticipation. When someone doesn't have to wonder about you, doesn't have to work to reach you, doesn't have to earn your time, they slowly stop valuing it. People don't respond to what you say your value is. They respond to what your behavior proves. And chasing behavior sends a very specific message. I'm more invested than you are, and I'm willing to work harder to keep you. That might sound like love in your head, but to the other person, it feels like pressure mixed with certainty. And certainty without effort kills excitement. When someone feels like they've already secured you without having to show up consistently, they stop trying. Not because they're evil, but because human nature doesn't reward what comes too easily. Now here's where it gets tricky. You think, if I just show more effort, they'll see how much I care. But what actually happens is the opposite. The more you chase, the less they feel the need to move towards you. It becomes one-sided, and you end up carrying the entire connection on your back. You start justifying their lack of effort. They're busy, they're stressed, they'll come around. Meanwhile, your actions are telling them, even if you don't show up fully, I'm not going anywhere. That's not attraction. That's convenience. There's also a psychological shift that happens inside you. The more you chase, the more emotionally dependent you become on their responses. Your mood starts rising and falling based on whether they text back, call, or show interest. You lose your center. You stop focusing on your own life, your own growth, your own peace. Everything starts revolving around them. And when someone becomes your emotional focus like that, they stop being someone you choose and they become someone you need. Neediness, no matter how well you try to hide it, always shows up in your energy. And let's be real for a second. Nobody is attracted to someone who feels like they have no options. When you're constantly available, constantly waiting, constantly adjusting your life to fit someone else's schedule, it signals that your world is small. High-value energy comes from having a full life, priorities, and standards that don't bend easily. It's not about playing games. It's about having a life that doesn't revolve around one person's attention. Think about how different it feels when someone knows they have to earn your time. When they're not sure if you'll always say yes. When they feel like your attention is something valuable, not something automatic. That creates curiosity. That creates effort. That creates respect. But when you remove that by always being the one to reach out first, always being the one to fix things, always being the one to keep the connection alive, you rob them of the opportunity to step up. There's also a subtle loss of self-respect that happens when you chase. Every time you ignore your own intuition, the feeling that says, this isn't balanced, or I deserve more effort, you teach yourself that your needs don't matter. And once you start believing that, you'll accept less without even realizing it. You'll start celebrating bare minimum behavior because it feels like progress compared to nothing. That's how people get stuck in situations where they're giving everything and receiving almost nothing. The shift isn't about becoming cold or distant. It's about balance. It's about matching energy instead of trying to manufacture it. If someone texts you, you respond. If they make plans, you show up. But if they disappear, you don't chase after them trying to pull them back. You let their absence speak. You let their actions reveal their level of interest. Because the truth is, someone who genuinely wants you doesn't need to be chased. They might not be perfect, but they'll make an effort. An effort is something you should never have to beg for. When you stop chasing, something powerful happens. You start seeing people clearly. Without all the extra effort you were putting in to keep things alive, the reality of the connection becomes obvious. Either they step up or they fade out, and both outcomes are valuable. One shows you they're willing to meet you halfway. The other shows you they were never that invested to begin with. And once you experience that clarity, you begin to understand something deeper. Your value isn't in how hard you can try to make someone stay. Your value is in recognizing when someone isn't meeting you and having the strength to step back without losing yourself in the process. The moment you start accepting disrespect, even in small doses, you're setting a standard that doesn't just affect this one situation. It becomes a pattern people recognize and follow. Disrespect rarely walks in loudly at the beginning. It shows up quietly. A delayed reply that feels intentional. A canceled plan without real accountability. A tone that feels dismissive. And in those moments, you have a choice. Address it or absorb it. Most people absorb it because they don't want to seem difficult, needy, or dramatic. But what you tolerate doesn't disappear. It multiplies. Every time you let something slide that doesn't sit right with you, you're sending a message without saying a word. This is acceptable. And people learn quickly. If someone sees that you won't challenge certain behavior, they don't feel pressure to improve it. Not because they're constantly trying to lower their effort, but because humans naturally settle into the level of expectation that's set in front of them. If the bar is low, they won't jump high. If there's no consequence, there's no motivation to change. Now understand this clearly. Respect isn't something you demand loudly. It's something you enforce quietly. It shows up in what you allow and what you walk away from. You don't need to argue every time someone does something wrong, but you do need to be consistent in how you respond. If someone disrespects your time by canceling plans last minute again and again, and you keep adjusting your schedule to accommodate them, you're teaching them that your time is flexible and theirs is valuable. That imbalance grows over time, and before you know it, you're the one waiting, adjusting, and hoping they show up. There's also a dangerous mindset that creeps in when you start accepting less than you deserve. You begin to justify behavior that you wouldn't have tolerated before. You tell yourself stories to make it easier to stay. They didn't mean it. They're just busy. At least they're trying. And while some of those things might be true occasionally, repeating that narrative over and over weakens your standards. You stop evaluating their actions objectively and start protecting your emotional investment instead. You're no longer asking, is this right for me? You're asking, how can I make this feel okay? And that shift costs you more than you realize. Because the more you lower your standards to keep someone, the more you disconnect from your own sense of worth. You start feeling uneasy, anxious, even frustrated, but you can't fully express it because you've already decided to tolerate the behavior. So now you're stuck in a loop, accepting things that bother you while silently hoping they change. That internal conflict drains your confidence. You might still smile, still show up, still engage, but inside something feels off. Here's the truth people avoid. When someone knows you won't walk away, they have no reason to step up. Your presence becomes guaranteed, not earned. And guaranteed attention, guaranteed patience, guaranteed forgiveness, those things don't inspire respect. They create comfort. And comfort without accountability leads to complacency. That's when effort drops. That's when inconsistency becomes normal. That's when you find yourself questioning your own value, wondering why you're not being treated the way you deserve. You have to understand that setting standards is not about controlling someone else's behavior. It's about controlling your response to it. You can't force someone to treat you better, but you can decide what happens when they don't. That decision is where your power lives. Not in arguing, not in convincing, not in proving your worth, but in choosing what you accept and what you don't engage with. And let's clear something up. Having standards doesn't push the right people away. It filters out the wrong ones. Someone who genuinely respects you will adjust when they see where your boundaries are. They won't always get it perfect, but they'll care enough to improve. On the other hand, someone who only values convenience will resist, pull back, or disappear when you stop tolerating everything. And that reaction tells you everything you need to know about their intentions. Another thing people overlook is how quickly behavior escalates when it goes unchecked. Small disrespect turns into bigger patterns. What starts as occasional inconsistency becomes regular unreliability. What starts as a dismissive tone becomes a lack of consideration. And by the time it becomes obvious, you're already emotionally invested, which makes it harder to step away. That's why early standards matter so much. It's easier to address something when it first appears than to fix it after it's been normalized. You also have to pay attention to how you feel, not just what's happening. Disrespect isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's a feeling, a sense that you're not being valued the way you should be. That feeling is information. Ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. It just delays the moment you have to deal with it. And the longer you wait, the more you compromise. When you start holding your standards, something shifts. You become more grounded. You stop reacting out of fear of losing someone and start responding from a place of self-respect. You don't rush to fix every problem. You don't chase explanations. You observe, you decide, and you act accordingly. And that energy changes how people approach you because now they understand that being in your life requires a certain level of effort, consistency, and respect. And once you operate from that place consistently, you begin to notice a pattern. People either rise to meet your standards or they remove themselves. Either way, you're no longer stuck in situations where you feel undervalued because you're no longer participating in dynamics that require you to accept less than what you know you deserve. When you react to everything, you hand over control without realizing it. Every delayed reply, every change in tone, every small shift in behavior starts pulling a response out of you. You feel it instantly, the urge to question, to double text, to figure out what changed. And in that moment, you're no longer operating from strength. You're operating from emotion. The problem isn't that you feel something. The problem is that you let every feeling dictate your behavior in real time. Emotional reactivity makes you predictable. And predictability in this context doesn't mean stability. It means someone can anticipate exactly how you'll respond and adjust their behavior accordingly. If they know you'll get anxious when they pull back, they don't feel pressure to stay consistent. If they know you'll confront them immediately every time something feels off, they prepare for it or avoid it. Either way, the dynamic becomes about managing your reactions instead of building genuine connection. Now think about how that plays out over time. You send a message, they don't reply quickly, and instead of staying grounded, your mind starts racing. You check your phone constantly. You replay the last conversation. You start wondering if you said something wrong. Then you react, you send another message, maybe lighter, maybe trying to fix the silence. In your mind, it feels like you're maintaining the connection, but what you're actually doing is showing that their inconsistency controls your emotional state. And people pick up on that energy faster than you think. You don't have to say, I'm anxious for it to be felt. It shows in how quickly you respond, how often you reach out, how you shift your tone to keep things smooth. That energy tells the other person, your actions affect me more than mine affect you. And the moment that imbalance is clear, the dynamic changes. You're no longer two people choosing each other. You're someone trying to hold on to someone else's attention. Emotional control isn't about being cold or pretending you don't care. It's about giving yourself space between what you feel and how you respond. That space is where your power lives. Because when you don't react immediately, you start seeing things more clearly. You notice patterns instead of isolated moments. You stop turning every small behavior into a big emotional event. And most importantly, you stop giving someone instant access to your reactions. Let's make it practical. If someone goes quiet for a few hours, or even a day, instead of jumping to conclusions, you stay focused on your own life. You don't sit there waiting. You don't create scenarios in your head. You allow them the space to show you who they are without interference. And when they do respond, you respond based on what you observe consistently, not what you felt in that one moment of silence. That shift alone changes everything, because now your actions are based on clarity, not emotion. There's also a deeper layer to this. When you're emotionally reactive, you're often seeking reassurance without saying it directly. You want them to prove they care. You want them to close the gap you're feeling. But the more you chase reassurance, the less meaningful it becomes. Because now it's not given freely, it's pulled out of them by your reactions. Real connection comes from mutual consistency, not from one person constantly needing confirmation. And here's something most people don't realize. Emotional reactivity doesn't just lower attraction, it creates pressure. When someone feels like every small action they take will trigger a reaction from you, they start walking on eggshells or pulling back to avoid that pressure altogether. Not because they don't care, but because the dynamic feels heavy. Instead of things flowing naturally, everything feels like it needs to be managed carefully. When you develop emotional steadiness, you become harder to read in the best way possible. Not mysterious for the sake of playing games, but grounded enough that your reactions aren't easily triggered. That creates respect. Because now, if something bothers you and you choose to address it, it carries weight. It's not just another reaction, it's a deliberate response. People take that more seriously because they know you don't react to everything. You also start protecting your own peace. Instead of riding an emotional roller coaster based on someone else's behavior, you stay centered. Your day doesn't get ruined because of a delayed message. Your mood doesn't depend on their level of attention. You become consistent within yourself, and that consistency is what gives you confidence. Not fake confidence, not forced detachment. Real confidence that comes from knowing you're in control of your own emotional state. And once you operate like that, the dynamic shifts naturally. You're no longer easy to manipulate through inconsistency. You're no longer someone who can be pulled closer or pushed away with small changes in behavior. You become someone who observes, decides, and moves accordingly. That changes how people approach you because now they understand that your attention isn't controlled by impulse. It's guided by awareness. The truth is, people respect what they can't easily shake. When your emotions aren't constantly on display, when your reactions aren't immediate and predictable, you create a sense of stability that others have to meet. And in that space, you're no longer reacting to every move. They are becoming more aware of theirs. When you don't have clear boundaries, you don't just make life easier for other people, you make it harder for yourself. Because without limits, everything becomes negotiable. Your time, your energy, your attention, your peace. And at first, it might feel like you're being understanding, flexible, easy to be with. But over time, what you're really doing is teaching people that there's no line they can't cross with you. Boundaries are not about controlling someone else's behavior. They're about deciding what you will and won't accept and then backing that decision with action. The problem is, most people set boundaries in their head but never express or enforce them in real life. They think, I won't tolerate this again. But when it happens, they stay quiet, hoping the other person will figure it out. That's not a boundary, that's a wish. And wishes don't change behavior. When you lack boundaries, you start overextending without realizing it. You say yes when you want to say no. You adjust your schedule to fit someone who doesn't adjust theirs for you. You tolerate conversations that feel disrespectful. You keep giving chances without seeing real change. And every time you do that, a small part of your self-respect gets compromised. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly, until you start feeling it in your confidence. Here's what people don't like to admit. When you don't respect your own boundaries, others won't feel the need to respect them either. Not because they're bad people, but because there's no consequence attached to crossing the line. If someone cancels plans last minute and you immediately reschedule without addressing it, they learn that your time isn't something they have to protect. If someone speaks to you in a way that feels off and you brush it aside to keep the peace, they learn that your standards are flexible. And flexible standards get tested again and again. There's also a deeper emotional cost to this. When you don't set boundaries, you start building quiet resentment. You might not express it openly, but it builds underneath. You feel unappreciated, overlooked, even taken for granted. But at the same time, you feel stuck because you've already allowed the behavior for so long. So now you're in a position where speaking up feels uncomfortable and staying silent feels exhausting. That internal conflict drains your energy and makes you question your own worth. Boundaries protect more than just your time. They protect your identity. They keep you aligned with who you are and what you stand for. Without them, you start shaping yourself around other people's expectations. You become more agreeable, more accommodating, more willing to tolerate things that don't sit right with you. And over time, you lose clarity on what you actually want because you've been so focused on maintaining the connection instead of maintaining yourself. A strong boundary doesn't always need a long explanation. Sometimes it's as simple as changing your behavior. If someone consistently shows up late, you don't wait around endlessly. You adjust your availability. If someone only reaches out when it's convenient for them, you stop being instantly available when they do. You're not punishing them. You're realigning your actions with your standards. And that shift speaks louder than any words you could use. Now, a lot of people fear that setting boundaries will push others away. And sometimes it will, but that's not a loss. That's clarity. Because the people who only stay when you have no limits are not respecting you. They're benefiting from your lack of boundaries. The moment you introduce standards, they feel restricted. Not because you're asking for too much, but because they were used to giving too little. On the other hand, the right people don't get scared off by boundaries. They adjust. They respect them. They might not get everything perfect right away, but they make the effort because they value the connection. That's how you start separating who is genuinely interested in you from who is just comfortable with you. Another important thing to understand is that boundaries are not just external, they're internal. It's not only about what others do, it's about what you allow yourself to keep investing in. Sometimes the boundaries decide not to keep pouring energy into someone who isn't reciprocating. Sometimes it's choosing not to engage in conversations that drain you. Sometimes it's recognizing that your time and attention are valuable and not everyone deserves access to them at the same level. And when you start living with that awareness, your behavior naturally changes. You become more selective. You stop over-explaining yourself. You don't feel the need to justify every decision. You move with a sense of calm certainty because you know where your lines are. And that kind of energy shifts how people interact with you. Because now they understand that being in your space requires a certain level of respect, consistency, and effort. What most people miss is that boundaries don't make you harder to love. They make you easier to respect. And respect is the foundation that keeps everything else from falling apart. When you have clear limits, you're not closing yourself off. You're creating a structure where real connection can exist without you losing yourself in the process.